Well, I think it was the darkest day in Pakistan history. You are right, there have been many dark days, but if you ask me, it was perhaps the darkest day in Pakistan history for many. Okay. It was the beginning of long military rule, which lasted about 10 years. It ended only when Zia-ul-Haq died in a crash. And that 10 years, if you ask me, has changed Pakistan completely. That Pakistan, what was created, was complete. The direction was changed, and I think if history will remember it, that it was the beginning. I will not say end of Pakistan, but certainly it laid the basis of Pakistan's downfall or a state of failure. It all started, as we know, the country was going through some political upheaval. It all started after 1977 elections, when the opposition, which was united under the banner of Pakistan National Alliance, it started a campaign against what they described as rigging in the election. And the movement, it was very interesting. The PNA was not only comprised of religious right groups, but also the left groups. Even some of them hardline leftist group were also part of it. So it was a strange coalition of all the political parties. They may have certain grievances, there's no doubt about it. There was some complaint about Ali Bhutto's policy 5 years, where some of the undemocratic measures he had taken. But it was also clear that it provided an excuse to right-wing groups, which certainly had the backing of security agencies at that point, to get together and launch this movement. Yes, as I said earlier, some of the leftist groups were also part of it, but the leadership was in the hands of right-wing religious group, which raised the slogan that they want to introduce Nizam-e-Mustafa in Pakistan, and that became the slogan of it. The other thing is that it was also backed by industrialists and business group. That was the backbone of PNA, if you ask me. That they provided the funding, they provided all kind of sources, because these were the classes which are affected by Mr. Bhutto's policy of nationalization. So in a way, that movement continued for almost 2.5 months. But interestingly, when Zia-ul-Haq, as we all know, he was picked up by Zulfiqar Bhutto to be the chief of army staff. He was not the senior most. He was number 8 in the seniority list. But Mr. Bhutto picked him up, thinking that he would remain loyal to him. It did not happen, and that was the lesson of history is. So I think behind the PNA movement, that has now become very apparent, and some of the books have also been written about it, that from the very outset, the military was behind the PNA movement. They wanted to remove Mr. Bhutto because of their own, conflict with him. And so turning point came when I think in June and end of June, at least 3 brigadiers refused to fire upon the PNA agitators who went on rampage in Lahore, and that was the beginning of what we say, the planning of the coup. It became very apparent, I think, from the first week. And interestingly, it was then Mr. Bhutto has almost reached an agreement with the PNA leaders to hold fresh election, and it seemed that all was settled. But some of the PNA leaders were obviously had something else in the mind, and they were in contact with the military, and they refused to sign that deal. And it happened actually on the 4th of night. Mr. Bhutto reached an agreement with the PNA leader, and few hours later, the military took over. Mr. Bhutto was in prison, and General Zia-ul-Haq's speech was not very different from what other military rulers which we have seen. They all come with the promise to reform the country and take the country on a progressive path. Zia also did that. He came the promise that he will hold on election on 90 days. As you mentioned earlier, that he declared that the army has come for a brief period to save the country from anarchy. But it became very, very clear soon that it was not for 90 days. The army has come in and stepped in with an agenda, and then later on, what followed, we have seen that 90 days become 900 days. Election never took place. But the worst is that some of the parties like Jamaat Islami and some other right-wing groups had cooperated fully with the military government. They became the part of military cabinet. So what we've seen that the military was successful for two reasons. Number one, because of the use of brute force, and the second thing, they also got the cooperation of some of the political groups. So that was the beginning of military rule. So Mr. Bhutto, suddenly when PNA movement was on, it seemed that Mr. Bhutto was losing control. But soon after the coup, entire scenario changed. And Mr. Bhutto, when he was released briefly from Murray, and so hundreds and thousands of people came out on the street of Lahore to greet him. And that was very clear to the military that they cannot control the situation. And Mr. Bhutto showed that he was still the most popular leader in the country. So a few months later, what we saw, that Mr. Bhutto was put on trial on a fake charges of murder, and that was and 2 years later, in a trial which historically we all know, it was a judicial murder of one of the most popular leaders and the first elected prime minister of the country, and that was Zia-ul-Haq's way of ruling the country. But worse is that after executing Mr. Bhutto, obviously the other, I would say, some of the political leaders were equally responsible for whatever happened over the next 10 years. They initially cooperated with the military, and later on some of them had developed some differences, but they did cooperate with the military. And then what we saw is that he introduced to perpetuate his rule. He introduced what was described, or what was his interpretation of Islam. He produced just to win over the support of the people. Even then, actually, the resistance was very strong. Until 1979, it seemed that the military government would not last long. Very strong resistance. People's Party gathered support, and what we saw, the ruthless use of state power to crush the movement. Despite all that, what we are witnessing, there is nothing but what happened there. Thousands of people were imprisoned. People were put or torture, were put in torture cells, and some of them were forced to leave the country. The judges who gave, even Supreme Court, which gave this verdict, was divided. It was a divided verdict, and later on, we saw some of the confession of the judges that they were forced to give this ruling. But despite the 4-3 ruling, Mr. Bhutto was executed because it never happened in the history.